I didn't know my life was about to fracture beyond repair the moment I lifted my champagne glass. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Too perfect, actually. The kind of polished illusion people envy without knowing what it costs to maintain. 21 years of marriage, a private room in an upscale steakhouse, soft golden lights reflecting off crystal glasses, linen napkins folded just right. The kind of place you reserve only for milestones. Our anniversary felt like one of those moments you're supposed to celebrate, even when something inside you already knows the truth but refuses to say it out loud. My husband sat across from me, smiling the way he always did in public, controlled, confident, distant. I had learned to read that smile over the years. It wasn't warmth, it was performance. Our children were there, our friends, his sister and her husband. Laughter floated through the room, rehearsed and effortless. I stood up halfway through dinner to make a toast, my hand trembling just slightly as I raised my glass. I spoke about commitment, about endurance, about building a life together. People applauded, glasses clinked. My husband leaned in, touched my hand, smiled at me like he always did when others were watching. I felt nothing. No love, no comfort, just obligation. That should have been my first warning. Around 8:30, I excused myself to use the restroom. I needed air, silence. A moment where I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. I was washing my hands, staring at my own reflection, trying to recognize the woman looking back at me when the bathroom door opened. A stranger stepped inside. She looked terrified. She glanced around, made sure we were alone, then leaned close and whispered words that stopped my heart mid-beat. "Your husband put something in your drink. I saw him do it." Time collapsed in on itself. She told me she'd watched him slip a small packet from his pocket, stir something into my champagne while everyone was distracted. She said he laughed afterward, with her, the woman sitting too close to him at our table. Before I could speak, before I could ask her anything, she left. I stood there alone, my hands shaking, my pulse roaring in my ears. And when I walked back toward that private room, the hallway felt longer than it ever had in my life. Because suddenly every smile felt fake, every laugh felt wrong. And the glass waiting for me on the table no longer looked like a celebration. It looked like a weapon. I'm 39 years old, and until that night at Meridian, I honestly believed I understood the man I married. His name is David. Steady, dependable, the kind of man people described with words like responsible and solid, the kind of husband your parents approve of, the kind of provider who never forgets a bill, never misses a workday, never lets the roof leak or the pantry go empty. And for a long time, that was enough for me to call it love. We met in our late teens, back when life felt like a hallway full of open doors. I worked part-time and went to school, living on cheap coffee and stubborn hope. David was the guy who always offered to walk me to my car, always remembered the small details, my favorite snack, the songs I liked, the way I took my tea. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was quiet in a way that felt safe. Safety can be intoxicating when you're young and tired of chaos. We built our relationship like people build a house from scratch. Slow, practical, careful. We got married, bought a modest home, and told ourselves that if we worked hard enough, love would stay simple. Then the children came. Sophie first, 16 now, sharp-eyed, observant, the kind of girl who pretends not to notice more than she actually does. Jake followed, 13. Still in that in-between stage where he wants to be grown, but still reaches for comfort without realizing it. I became a mother the way I became a wife, fully, completely, with the belief that devotion meant durability. I managed schedules, school forms, doctor appointments, birthday parties. I learned every preference in our household the way you learn a second language, fluently, instinctively, without thinking. I told myself that love was shown in the invisible labor no one applauds. David worked hard, 60-hour weeks sometimes. He climbed steadily, earned more, and with each promotion came another symbol of success, better vacations, nicer restaurants, a bigger house. We looked like we'd made it. But somewhere along the way, we stopped feeling like we were on the same team. It wasn't one dramatic moment, it was thousands of small ones. The way David started correcting me in front of people, like my thoughts were clumsy. The way he'd sigh when I talked about my day, eyes drifting toward his phone. The way he'd call me emotional whenever I asked for something as basic as tenderness. And I adjusted. I got quieter. I tried to be easier. I tried to be the version of a wife that required less maintenance. His family was always in the background, too. His sister Rachel had been part of our life from the beginning. She was charming in a bright, effortless way, the kind of woman who could make a room laugh without trying. She came to holidays, birthdays, school events. She and David had that sibling rhythm, teasing, inside jokes, shared history. Her husband Ben was the fun one, social, warm, the guy who always offered to grill, always made the kids laugh. We were intertwined, not just as couples, but as a family unit. That's why the early signs felt so easy to dismiss. David started going out more without me. Work dinners, networking, just guys unwinding. He started paying more attention to his appearance, wearing cologne he'd never used before, buying shirts that didn't look like him. He'd come home later and later, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in years, except the brightness never seemed to belong to me. And then there were the Thursdays. Thursdays became sacred, untouchable. He'd leave at the same time, return at the same time, always with the same excuse. I've got a meeting, or I need to clear my head, or don't start, I'm exhausted. I would watch him grab his keys, watch the door close, and feel something sour settle in my stomach. But I told myself what loyal wives tell themselves when the truth is too painful. He's just stressed. It's just a phase. 21 years is a long time. Things get dull. We'll find our way back. I wanted to believe that badly enough to make it true. That's the thing about marriage. Sometimes you don't realize you've been negotiating your own worth down to nothing until someone finally forces you to see it. And that night at Meridian, standing in that bathroom with a stranger's warning still ringing in my ears, I understood something with brutal clarity. The man I trusted with my life might have been planning to take my control away from me. When I walked back into that private room at Meridian, nothing looked different. That was the most disturbing part. The same laughter, the same low music humming through the walls, the same plates half finished, glasses half full. My life hadn't paused just because my understanding of it had shattered. David was laughing with Ben. Not just laughing, leaning toward him, shoulder angled in, his hand resting casually on Ben's arm in a way that suddenly felt too familiar, too practiced. The kind of body language you don't notice until you know exactly what it means. Rachel sat beside them, smiling, nodding along, completely at ease, and my champagne glass was right where I'd left it. The bubbles rose lazily to the surface, innocent and golden, like nothing in the world could be wrong. I didn't think, I didn't plan. I acted. When David reached for his wine glass, I slid my champagne toward him and took the wine instead, doing it smoothly enough that it looked playful. Natural. The kind of gesture a wife makes after 21 years without anyone questioning it. He didn't even look down. He lifted the glass I'd just handed him and smiled at me. To forever, he said. The words landed in my chest like something sharp and poisonous. I forced a smile and clinked my glass against his. My heart was pounding so hard, I was afraid someone would hear it. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. I watched him drink, and then I waited. 12 minutes passed. Then 15. It started small. David blinked more than usual, rubbing his eyes like they were dry. His laughter came out louder than necessary, a fraction too slow, like it didn't belong to the conversation anymore. His posture loosened in a way that felt wrong, careless, unguarded. Then he tried to stand. His knees buckled. The room went quiet. I was on my feet instantly, playing my role perfectly. The concerned wife. The steady one. I caught him before he fell, my hands firm on his arms. Hey, hey, I said softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you okay? He mumbled something incoherent, his pupils blown wide, his focus slipping in and out like a broken signal. Someone joked awkwardly about champagne on an empty stomach. A few people laughed, relieved to have an explanation. But I knew. I knew he had meant for me to be the one slurring words, for me to be the one losing control of my body while everyone watched. And what shattered me completely wasn't just that realization. It was the way he leaned into Rachel. Not stumbled, not reached. Melted. Her arm went around his waist automatically, instinctively, like this wasn't new. Like she'd held him up before. Like they knew exactly how each other fit. That's when everything I'd ignored finally lined up. The late nights that never came with real explanations. The sudden interest in fitness without any visible results. The expensive new underwear I never saw him wear for me. The way his phone was always face down, always guarded. The Thursdays he swore were meetings, but never produced a single detail. I sat him back down carefully, smiling at the table like nothing was wrong, while my stomach twisted itself into knots. Inside, something else was happening. Something cold. Something sharp. I reached into my purse beneath the table and pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking just enough to make typing difficult. I texted Marcus. He was an old friend from college, private investigator now, specialized in infidelity cases. We joked once, years ago, about how I'd never need his services. I was wrong. I need everything on my husband. Phone records, locations, surveillance, whatever you can get. I need the truth. The reply came back almost immediately. On it, I won't miss a thing. I looked up at David, slumped in his chair, eyelids fluttering, murmuring Rachel's name like it belonged there. And for the first time in 21 years, I stopped trying to save my marriage. I started protecting myself. Getting David out of that restaurant was a performance I didn't know I was capable of. I smiled. I apologized to the table. I joked lightly about anniversary drinks hitting harder than expected. I played the role of the devoted wife so convincingly that even I almost believed it. I told Sophie and Jake that their father must have mixed his anxiety medication with alcohol again. Technically, not a lie, just not the full truth. Rachel hovered too close, her hand never leaving David's back. Ben watched everything with an intensity that made my skin crawl, his phone lighting up repeatedly in his palm. I noticed every detail. I stored it all away. In the parking lot, I buckled David into the passenger seat myself, careful and gentle. His head lolled toward the window, his breath uneven. For a brief, dangerous moment, he looked small, vulnerable. That moment passed. In the rearview mirror, as we pulled away, I saw Ben typing furiously, his face tight with something that looked suspiciously like panic. At home, I guided David upstairs, step by unsteady step. He collapsed onto the bed without grace, his expensive jacket twisted beneath him, his polished image crumpling into something ugly and exposed. I pulled the covers over him and stepped back. Standing there, watching him sleep, I felt something close to grief. Not for the man in front of me, for the woman I had been before that night. The one who believed loyalty would eventually be returned, the one who thought patience could soften cruelty. I closed the bedroom door and didn't look back. In the garage, tucked behind old storage boxes, was a small case I'd bought months earlier during what David had teasingly called my paranoid phase. Cameras, trackers, things I'd told myself I'd never need. Turns out my instincts had been screaming long before my mind caught up. I started with his car. I slid beneath the dashboard, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins, and installed a GPS tracker that would send real-time data straight to my phone. I tested it twice before sealing everything back up. Then I moved to his gym bag. I expected sweat-soaked clothes, a water bottle, protein bars. What I found instead made my blood run cold. A prepaid phone, wrapped carefully inside his workout leggings, a burner. I didn't touch it beyond photographing it from every angle. I didn't power it on. I didn't give him any reason to suspect I knew. Evidence first, emotion later. I went back upstairs around 1 a.m. David was snoring lightly, completely unaware that the foundation beneath him was already cracking. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, committing the sight to memory. 21 years of marriage. And this was how he chose to end it. The next morning, he came downstairs cheerful and relaxed, like the night before hadn't happened at all. He poured coffee, kissed my cheek, complained jokingly about a headache. "What happened to me last night?" he asked casually. "I feel like I got hit by a truck." "You probably drank too fast," I said evenly. "Empty stomach." He laughed it off without question. That was when I understood something crucial. He truly believed he was untouchable. Marcus delivered the first wave of information 3 days later. It was worse than I expected. Phone records, hundreds of texts, all to one number registered under a false name. Location data showing the same downtown hotel, Grandview Suites, every single Thursday afternoon for 5 months straight. Room service charges, champagne, strawberries, candles, massage oil. They weren't sneaking around in shame. They were indulging. But the footage was what finally destroyed any part of me still clinging to denial. Security cameras in the hallway showed them arriving separately, always minutes apart. David pressing Rachel against the wall, laughing, touching her like he hadn't touched me in years, leaving hours later, hair disheveled, faces flushed with satisfaction. I watched every second. Not because I needed proof anymore, because I needed it to hurt. I needed to feel the betrayal fully, so I'd never be tempted to soften it later. Never gaslight myself into believing it wasn't that bad. It was that bad. And it was deliberate. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I spent the next 2 weeks playing the perfect wife, while quietly dismantling the life he thought was secure. I moved half our savings into a separate account. I transferred the house deed under a refinancing clause he didn't bother to read. I documented every lie, every dollar. Then I met with 3 divorce attorneys. I chose the meanest one, and together we waited. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted it to land where it would hurt the most. Shock doesn't arrive the way people describe it. It doesn't knock you flat or steal your breath in one dramatic moment. It settles in quietly, like a heavy fog that makes everything feel distant and unreal. I still packed lunches, still answered emails, still smiled at my children, but underneath all of it, something in me had gone numb and sharp at the same time. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of David. I didn't throw anything or demand explanations. I observed. I watched him move through our house with the confidence of a man who believed his double life was flawless. He kissed me on the cheek in the mornings, asked about my day, complained about work. He even had the audacity to tease me for being quiet lately, like silence was a flaw instead of a shield. At night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and replayed everything I'd missed. Not just the affair, my own slow disappearance. I thought about every time I'd apologized just to keep the peace. Every time I'd swallowed my needs because he looked tired or irritated. Every time I'd convinced myself that wanting affection after 2 decades of marriage was somehow childish or demanding. What did I do wrong? The question haunted me at first. But the more evidence Marcus sent, the clearer the answer became. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't loneliness or confusion. This was entitlement. David didn't feel neglected. He felt bored. And boredom, to him, justified betrayal. The first confrontation came quietly, almost accidentally. We were alone in the kitchen one evening, the kids upstairs. He was scrolling on his phone, smiling faintly at something on the screen. I watched his face soften in a way it never did for me anymore. "Who's that?" I asked casually. He didn't even look up. "Just work stuff." The lie was automatic, effortless. I nodded, letting the silence stretch. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "Do you ever feel guilty?" I asked. That got his attention. He frowned slightly. "About what?" "About anything," I said. "About the choices you make when no one's watching." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Not remorse. Calculation. "You're overthinking again," he said, irritation creeping into his tone. "You always do this. Turn nothing into a problem." There it was. The dismissal. The rewriting of reality that had kept me second-guessing myself for years. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said calmly. "I'm just asking." He sighed dramatically, pushing his chair back. "I work my ass off for this family. The least I deserve is a little trust." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. That line had worked on me for 21 years. It had kept me quiet, compliant, grateful. It didn't work anymore. "I trust what I see," I replied. He stared at me for a long moment, then smirked slightly. "And what do you think you see?" I met his gaze, my pulse steady despite the storm inside me. "A man who thinks loyalty is optional," I said. He scoffed and walked away, conversation dismissed. That was the moment something inside me finally shifted. I stopped asking myself how to save the marriage. I started asking how to save myself. I began sleeping in short bursts, waking up before dawn to sit alone in the quiet living room. Sometimes I cried silently. Other times I felt nothing at all. Both scared me in different ways. I thought about Sophie and Jake, about the example I was setting, about what they were learning from watching me shrink to accommodate someone else's ego. I realized I didn't want my daughter growing up believing love meant endurance at any cost. I didn't want my son thinking deception was forgivable as long as it was hidden well enough. So when Marcus called one afternoon and said, "There's more, and it's bad," I didn't panic. I thanked him, because by then I was ready. Not to explode, but to end it. Cleanly, completely. On my terms. The escalation didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with pressure. Subtle at first, then relentless. David's family started showing up more often. unannounced, smiling too brightly, asking questions that weren't really questions. His mother lingered in the kitchen, commenting on how tired her son looked lately. His father pulled me aside one afternoon and suggested that men go through phases, and that a good wife knows when to keep a marriage together by not making things harder than they already are. I listened. I smiled. And I took notes. Rachel became bolder. She started texting David more openly, not even bothering to hide it when I was in the room. She'd sit across from me at the dining table, laughing at something on her phone, exchanging looks with him that passed just a second too long. It felt deliberate, like she wanted me to notice, like she was daring me to say something. Ben joined in too, in his own way. Casual jokes, backhanded compliments, little comments about how relationships change after kids or how people need excitement to feel alive. They were building a narrative, one where David was the victim, one where I was the problem. Friends followed suit. A woman I'd known for years told me over coffee that I seemed distant lately and asked if everything was okay at home, with that tone people use when they've already made up their minds. Another friend suggested I try being more spontaneous, like loyalty and patience weren't enough unless they came with entertainment value. Every conversation felt like an accusation wrapped in concern, and through it all, David stayed calm. Too calm. He leaned into the role of the misunderstood husband with practiced ease. He'd sigh when people asked how things were going, shake his head, say things like, "She's just stressed," or "I don't know what I did wrong," or my personal favorite, "I'm trying my best." Watching him rewrite our reality in real time was enlightening. Marcus kept feeding me evidence. More hotel footage, more messages, voice recordings, proof that the affair wasn't just emotional or impulsive, it was calculated, planned, sustained. They joked about me in messages, about how oblivious I was, about how safe I made everything, while they took what they wanted behind my back. That was the moment anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger, focused anger. I confronted David again, this time without questions. "I know," I said one night after the kids were asleep. He froze for half a second, then recovered quickly. "Know what?" "About you and Rachel," I said calmly. He laughed. Actually laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "You're paranoid," he said. "That's insulting." "I've seen the footage," I replied. Silence. Not denial. Not outrage. Calculation. "You went through my things?" he asked slowly, his voice dropping. "I protected myself," I said. His face hardened. "You're crossing a line." The irony almost took my breath away. "What line?" I asked. "The one where you drugged my drink? Or the one where you sleep with your sister behind my back?" That did it. He exploded, not with guilt, but with blame. "You pushed me away," he snapped. "You stopped being fun. You stopped trying. I didn't sign up for a marriage that felt like a job." "And I didn't sign up to be poisoned," I said quietly. He scoffed. "It wasn't poison. It was just something to relax you. You take everything so dramatically." That sentence landed like a verdict. I knew then there was no version of this where he took responsibility. No apology was coming. No remorse. Only excuses dressed up as honesty. After that, the fights became frequent. Loud, ugly. His family rallied around him. Friends stopped calling me. Whispers followed me into rooms. People chose sides without asking questions. And in the middle of it all, something unexpected happened. I stopped bending. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I started standing straighter, speaking less, watching more. David noticed. "You're different," he said one evening, suspicion in his eyes. "I'm awake," I replied. The tension reached a breaking point when he tried to control the narrative publicly. He suggested a family brunch. Everyone, all at once. I agreed. Because by then I had everything, and I was done being quiet. The night before that brunch, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark beside a man I no longer recognized, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, and felt the full weight of what was about to happen settle on my chest. Not fear of him, fear of after, of the fallout, of what this would do to my children, of how final everything was about to become. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing the truth while everyone else still believes the lie. I felt it in my bones. I got out of bed around 3 a.m. and sat on the living room floor, my back against the couch, knees pulled to my chest. The house was silent in a way it never used to be. No hum of connection, no shared warmth, just space. I thought about Sophie, about the way she'd grown quieter over the past year, about how she watched conversations instead of joining them, about how she flinched when voices rose. Children always know more than we think. They just don't always have the words. I thought about Jake, too, how he'd started avoiding home by staying late at practice, how he asked fewer questions, how his laughter sounded forced. And then I thought about myself, how long I'd stayed because leaving felt selfish, how I'd mistaken endurance for strength, how I'd taught my children, without meaning to, that love was something you survived instead of something that held you. That realization hurt more than the betrayal. By morning, my body felt heavy, like I was moving underwater. I made breakfast. I braided Sophie's hair with hands that shook just slightly. I told myself, just get through today. The brunch was set for 11. By 10:45, the house was already filling with voices. David's parents arrived first, all smiles and forced cheer. Rachel and Ben followed, acting so normal it felt obscene. She hugged me tightly, whispered, "Everything okay?" in my ear, like she wasn't sleeping with my husband. Friends trickled in. Plates were filled. Mimosas poured. I watched it all from a distance, like I was observing a scene I was no longer part of. When everyone had food in front of them, David caught my eye and nodded slightly. His signal. This was his stage. He stood first, lifting his glass. "I just want to say," he began, voice smooth, practiced, "how grateful I am for family, for forgiveness, for understanding. Marriage isn't easy, and sometimes people go through rough patches." My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. For a split second, doubt crept in. What if I'm wrong? What if this destroys everything and I can't put it back together? Then I remembered the footage, the messages, the laughter. I stood up. "I'd like to add something," I said. The room went quiet. David's smile tightened. "Maybe not now." "No," I replied evenly. "Now is perfect." I felt the moment stretch, the air thick with anticipation. Every eye turned toward me. My hands were cold, my mouth dry. This was it. And yet, underneath the fear, there was something else. Relief. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't holding myself back. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't protecting someone who had never protected me. Still, as I looked around that table, at the faces I'd known for decades, at the family I thought I was part of, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not because I still loved him, but because I was finally letting go of the life I'd built around that lie. The darkest moment isn't always when you're betrayed. Sometimes it's when you accept that the version of your life you fought so hard to preserve never actually existed. And once you see that, there's no going back. I didn't raise my voice. That surprised even me. "I want to make a toast too," I said, my tone calm enough that a few people actually smiled in relief. They thought this was going to be a joint moment, a reconciliation, a performance of unity. David's jaw tightened. "To honesty," I continued, lifting my glass, "and to the people who believe the truth can stay hidden just because it's uncomfortable." The room stilled. Rachel's smile froze mid-breath. Ben's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. David stared at me, eyes narrowing, trying to decide whether I was bluffing. I wasn't. "For 5 months," I said evenly, "my husband has been spending his Thursday afternoons at the Grandview Suites downtown. Always the same room, always the same time, always with the same woman." A sharp inhale rippled through the table. David laughed nervously. "This is insane." "I'm not finished," I said. I reached into my bag and placed a small stack of papers on the table. Hotel receipts, time-stamped photos, printed messages. I slid one photograph across the table, face down, until it stopped directly in front of Rachel. She didn't flip it over. She didn't need to. I didn't want to believe it, I continued, my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering. I told myself I was imagining things, that 21 years meant something, that family meant something. I looked directly at David. "You drugged my drink on our anniversary because you didn't want me fully aware of what was already happening right in front of me." Gasps. Someone's fork clattered to the plate. "That's a lie," David snapped, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "She's unstable. She's been paranoid for months." "Sit down," his mother said quietly. The room went silent again. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her son. I watched something shift in her expression as she reached for the documents with shaking hands. She scanned them slowly, her face draining of color. Rachel finally picked up the photo. It showed her in a hotel hallway, hair loose, laughing, her hand tangled in David's shirt like she belonged there. She dropped it like it burned. "I can explain," Rachel started. No, I said, you can't. Ben stood up next, his voice raised, defensive. This isn't fair. You don't know what he told her. I know exactly what he told her, I replied, because I have the messages. David's father pushed his chair back slowly, staring at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. Is this true? He asked. David didn't answer. He looked at me instead, angry, desperate, calculating. That was my turning point. Not the evidence. Not the gasps. Not the betrayal laid bare. It was the way he looked at me in that moment. Not with regret, but with resentment. Like I had stolen something from him by telling the truth. That's when it finally clicked. This wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about control. I straightened my shoulders. I'm done, I said simply. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to be believed. The truth is the truth, whether you accept it or not. I placed one final envelope on the table. Divorce papers. I've already spoken to an attorney, I continued. The house is in my name. The accounts are separated. If you fight this, if you try to smear me or intimidate me, everything you've seen here today becomes public record. David's face went white. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. I'm taking my children and leaving this marriage, I said. Not because I hate you, but because staying would mean hating myself. No one stopped me as I walked away from the table. Not David, not Rachel, not Ben. As I reached the doorway, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because it was over, but because I finally chose myself. The aftermath didn't explode all at once. It unraveled. Slowly, publicly, irreversibly. I didn't slam doors or shout accusations as I left that brunch. I simply walked upstairs, packed a small suitcase for myself and the kids, and drove away while the house behind me dissolved into chaos. I heard it later, voices raised, chairs scraping, Rachel crying, David shouting, his parents demanding answers he couldn't give without destroying himself further. I wasn't there to watch it. I didn't need to be. By the time we reached my sister's place that afternoon, my phone was already vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, texts, voicemails layered with panic, anger, and disbelief. David left the first message. You blindsided me, he said, his voice tight and furious. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You didn't have to do it like that. I deleted it. The second message came from his mother. Her voice was quieter, older, stripped of excuses. I raised you better than this, she said. Not to me, but to him, in a message she clearly didn't mean to include me on. You've destroyed your family. Rachel's message came later that night. She was crying. She said she hadn't meant for it to go this far, that she'd been lonely, that David had told her our marriage was basically over, that she loved me in her own way. I didn't respond. Because whatever love requires betrayal is not love worth naming. The consequences came fast after that. David's carefully curated image cracked. Friends who had once defended him stopped calling. His parents pulled their financial support from Rachel and Ben entirely. Family gatherings were canceled indefinitely. Invitations quietly disappeared. The silence was louder than any confrontation. At work, things shifted too. Word travels faster than people think, especially when truth is backed by evidence. David took personal leave that never seemed to end. Rachel stopped posting on social media altogether. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched the lies collapse under their own weight. At night, when the kids were asleep, I allowed myself to feel it all. The grief, the anger, the exhaustion. I cried quietly into my pillow some nights, not because I missed him, but because I mourned the years I'd spent convincing myself that something hollow was solid. Sophie asked questions. I answered honestly, without poisoning her heart. Your father made choices, I told her, and those choices have consequences. None of this is your fault. Jake stayed quieter, processing in his own way. One evening, he sat beside me on the couch and said, You seem stronger. I swallowed hard before replying. I had to be, I said, for both of us. The divorce moved quickly. David didn't fight. He couldn't. The evidence was airtight. The threats he'd once used to control conversations, money, reputation, stability, meant nothing when the truth was documented and ready to be exposed. He signed, quietly. The man who once told me I was too emotional couldn't even look at me across the table. Rachel and Ben didn't last long after that. Betrayal doesn't build strong foundations. It just delays collapse. They moved out of state within months, chasing anonymity like a reset button. It didn't work. And me? I didn't get revenge. I got peace. I walked away with my dignity intact, my children beside me, and my life back in my own hands. And for the first time in decades, that felt like everything. The quiet that followed surprised me. Not the empty kind, the kind that echoes, but a steady, breathable silence. The kind that doesn't demand anything from you. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. The house felt different once David was gone. Lighter, calmer. The tension that had lived in the walls for years seemed to dissolve. Sophie laughed more freely. Jake stopped flinching when voices rose. Even the air felt cleaner, like something toxic had finally been removed. I rebuilt slowly. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations or public triumphs. I rebuilt with routines. Morning coffee in silence. Evenings spent helping with homework instead of walking on emotional glass. I redecorated our bedroom with things that felt real instead of impressive. Soft light, clean lines, nothing that required pretending. One evening, Sophie stood in the doorway and said, "It feels honest now." She was right. David faded into the background of our lives. His calls became infrequent, his excuses irrelevant. When he did reach out, it wasn't to apologize. It was to test whether I still cared. I didn't. The last time he tried, months later, he stood in front of me with tears in his eyes and said, "You weren't enough for me." I looked at him calmly and replied, "I was too much for someone who wanted less." That was the end of it. I learned something important through all of this, something I wish someone had told me years ago. Loyalty is not self-erasure. Endurance is not love. And silence is not strength when it costs you your identity. If you're listening to this and something feels wrong in your relationship, if the smiles feel rehearsed, if the explanations don't add up, if your instincts keep whispering when you're trying desperately not to hear them, trust yourself. You're not imagining it. You're waking up. You don't need revenge to heal. You don't need them to fall for you to rise. Sometimes, the strongest thing a woman can do is stop trying to save a marriage that was already hollow and start saving herself. This isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about remembering who I was before I forgot and choosing not to disappear again.